Welcome to Grant the Mic, the podcast for nonprofits, grant professionals, and grant consultants who want to elevate their grant game and make a bigger impact. I'm your host, Allison Boyd, founder of Boyd Grants and the Boyd Grants Academy. Each week, we dive into the world of grant funding, sharing tips, insights, and stories from experts, leaders, and funders themselves. From building a strong grant-seeking culture to collaborating with consultants to crafting a proposal that truly wins support, this is your go-to place for actionable strategies and inspiration. Whether you're just starting your grant journey or you've been writing proposals for years, we're here to help you learn, grow, and get results. So grab your coffee, get comfortable, and let's grant the mic. Everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Grant the Mic. Today, we are talking about grants versus fundraising and when you should focus on each of those. This episode is going to talk about the key differences between grant seeking and fundraising, how nonprofits should prioritize resources based on organizational goals, what are some best practices for integrating grants and fundraising for that maximum impact, and just some good old examples of life lessons learned along the way. And so today I have with me Nicole and Troy, and I've known these ladies for quite a while, and they are some of my favorite people in the world. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but they have been in the sphere of fundraising for as many years or more as I've been in grants. And so I hope that you guys can learn something from them and take into consideration what they say about how grants and fundraisings work together. I'm going to start, Nicole, you're on my top screen, so I'm going to start with you. So if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, we'll get started.
I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor of Foundation Advancement at Lone Star College, and I also serve as the Executive Director of Lone Star College Foundation. Been in fundraising, I did the math for you, Allison, and we're on the other side of 25 years, knocking on 30, closer to 30 than 25. It's been an incredible career, nonprofit fundraising, and this is my first higher ed job, but I've been in the role for more than 9 years and love the work.
That's great. You kind of have forgotten that. So Nicole has also won the Athena Award, which is a really special award about all of the impact and that she's had in our community. And so she is a community-minded individual and just looks at the world through the lens of how do we help others. And I think that brings a great and special piece to the work that she does. So Troy, tell us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been in fundraising.
Well, we'll start with how long I've been in fundraising since before both of y'all were born. So we'll leave it at that. We're not going to go into the number of years because it's a lot. In fact, I think my whole career truly has been in the nonprofit world, and I just love it. I presently serve as the Chief Advancement Officer at the Woodlands Christian Academy, and served at another institution in that same role for 23 years. And so I've been in educational fundraising with independent schools for, over 25 years. But served, again with hospitals and different organizations prior to that. And I always like to share that I've been on both sides of it, and that I've been in the volunteer role and volunteer leadership role, helping organizations fundraise, and then I kind of landed in the role of kind of oversight of that as well. So I love it too.
I think we're a trio who just love what we do. So okay, I'm going to kick us off with asking a blanket question. Y'all can answer first come, first serve. So, how have you seen organizations successfully balance fundraising and grants together?
Awkward silence. Okay.
You want me to dive in? Go.
since you've got a foundation committee.
think the balance is the best thing for me when I was thinking about preparing for this is grants is a strategy, right? It has to align. So you're not going to ask a foundation. You're not going to write a grant to a foundation for something that they don't fund, just like you wouldn't go to a donor for a subject that you know they don't care about. Not they don't care about it, but it might not be their priority. And so I think you deploy your strategies appropriately. And so I think that's the kind of for me, that's the highest level, biggest picture answer that I could give is that's the most important thing is use it appropriately, just like you would any donor. Because what even in federal and state grants, there are humans that are reading the grant app. Well, AI is a whole different conversation and it's a different podcast. But right now there are still humans reading all of this and evaluating it and making final decisions, and so there's always the human element in grants, and I never want people to forget.
Yeah, and again, I think that's best said, that's the best practices part of this is that it's gotta be part your toolkit. How are we going to raise the funds we need? How are we going to share our impact of these gifts? And so you've gotta really look at what the efforts are and who all is in the room and who all can help you. Um, and I think that's how we have found success, when we were able to reach out to organizations that provided grants and charitable organizations that did that kind of work, um, is also being in line with their mission, like Nicole said, is are we in line with their mission? Are we something that they would support? Because grants take, manpower, they take technological, they take all the power and they require a lot of energy, and you can't take any of that lightly, because if you're going to put forth that effort, I think you have to really have all of your things in place, your people in place, your stories in place, your numbers and analysis in place. And so, I think it devotes time and effort. Um, but the outcome can be glorious, especially if it feeds into, again, that your missions are aligned and it's going to be impactful to, in our case, our school.
So, to okay, I was listening to another podcast the other day and it just made me laugh because I like to say to piggyback on that. But this person was like, I'm going to say, and so, which I think is a great transition. All that to say, I think that there's a component that we deal with as Boyd Grants and working with our clients. We come in on the capital campaigns often of they have their fundraising strategy. They're in the silent phase. They're talking to large donors and things like that. And then we come in and we support with the writing piece of the grants and making sure that the foundations that they're going after align with the work that they're doing and whatever the capital campaign piece is. So we've seen it kind of go both ways in the fact that grants can be in a campaign like that if they're left as the afterthought of, oh, we've got like 20% more we have to raise and we've tapped out all of our people and now let's wing it and go to grants. That seems to be a harder shift than for teams like ours when we come in, than when we are starting alongside and saying, okay, you're going to talk to the donors of this foundation. Great, we're going to prep the work for the applying for grants for that foundation and let's say the same things and let's really build those relationships because everything truly goes back to relationships, whether it's a grant or asking for a donation. Um, so anyway, all that to say, I really think that in when we're looking at fundraising and campaigns, it's something that it can't be an afterthought, but just like asking your donors isn't an afterthought. It is a piece of the strategy as a whole. So
I mean, I totally agree with that. It's a strategy. And imagine if you had grants in from the beginning, you might have had that last 20% at the front end and you might be done if your grant strategy was really part of really a strategy from the beginning. I 100% agree.
We've seen where funders have said, won't, or foundations have said, we're not going to commit until you have 80% of the funding committed from not just individual donors, but from corporations and foundations. And that percentage has to be whatever it is. But you can't go after that as a last minute attempt. Like, you've got to be building that relationship up front and saying, hey, dear funder, we're going to start a capital campaign. Let's talk and walk them all the way through your strategy of how you're going to raise those dollars.
Well, and the fundraiser in me says, well, and you've missed an opportunity to create a sense of urgency with your donors to say, get us to 80% because we know where the last 20% is coming from, right, Troy? I'm sure you do
I
the same thing.
agree. I saw a really good quote the other day, and it says, "Impact is nothing if you're not communicating it." So you can all be on board with everything you're talking about internally, but if you're not sharing that with others, and you're not sharing again how their gifts are going to be impactful, and I think we think of that. Especially in smaller organizations, we think our only outlet is the people that we know,
Mhm.
and the people we have. And of course, fundraising 101 will tell you, it's all about relationships, and it is. But I think we forget that you have to build those relationships with foundations as well. And, of course, it's nice to have someone that in that foundation or that organization. Certainly that helps anywhere you are. Um, but I think that you're right. I don't think we put that in the right spot when it comes to foundations and the gifts that they are able and willing to support educate. For both of us, I feel so fortunate to be in education because we know, it's one of the top two, right? It's one of the top two. People will support their own schools. They'll support their children's schools. Corporations love to support, education. So, I feel like I landed in the perfect spot every day. When I walk in those doors, it's the perfect spot because it's really easy. And I know, Nicole, you feel this way too, to walk across your campus and see a million stories that you can share, see all the impact you can share. And I just think that we should be grateful for that because I don't know that that's the case across the world. And I think it's harder to share. So you're right, Allison. I think we've got to add them to our premier strategy versus, okay, now we got to where are we going to get this last bit?
I think that doesn't stop at capital campaigns. I think that that's just an easy example just because it's a it's got a start and a stop date, right? And you can create a plan of exactly how you're going to do that. But I think when we're talking about strategy in and of itself, if anything, 2025 has taught a lot of people that if you don't go into um, fundraising and grant writing with a strategy, that you can do and say all of the right things, but if you don't have a plan backing that up, it's really hard. And I think that there are key differences in building a grant strategy than there are in building a fundraising strategy. But I don't think that those two can um, work on their own in order and just do their own thing and hope that eventually you come back together and it all was cohesive and it made sense. So, um, let's talk through kind of what are some differences in y'all talk about how some strategies for fundraising, what those look like, and I'll talk about strategies for grants and prospecting and things like that, and we'll see what kind of matches. So when you're thinking of building your strategy for fundraising for say, um, we'll do scholarships because that's kind of both your worlds. Uh, what do you plan to do to outreach and build those gifts in the way that you need to?
Well, I think, again, going back to first things first, I think that they always talk about that circle, of fundraising, starting with cultivation and building those relationships and sharing your stories and getting to know people and figuring out all the ways to do that way before you start the appeal process. Sometimes we don't have time for that, I mean, sometimes it's like, I don't know all of you guys, but I want to appeal to you with our annual fund. But during that process, cultivating in the sense that you can start sharing stories and showing those pictures of people involved in your campus and different things that you're doing. And then you do your appeals. And then the important last step is that stewardship piece of stewarding them along the way, um, and celebrating those gifts, but also, understanding that you're building this culture of generosity, in trying to see what that looks like, and then knowing that you hope that that will build, and you hope that those donors you will be able to retain those donors, and they become, people who are generous to your organization from now on. So, I think you have to start there, in the fundraising process. And again, I always again feel really grateful that my life and education has been with independent schools, because I feel like we do know our audiences. We do know our largest audience, rather, in our current families. And because we're a young school, we know our folks. We get to have conversations with them, and not every nonprofit gets to do that. So I'm very grateful for that.
I think one of the biggest differences is how you do that cultivation. And I think I've found that as a fundraiser, the biggest challenge is, when you're writing a grant for an organization that only accepts grants, and they may or may not be interested in relationship building. They may tell you if they're interested in you, and so it's tricky to build those relationships. And what I have found is whenever you meet them, you stay in touch, right? If you meet any human from a foundation, or anyone on a board, you stay in touch. But knowing about them, I mean, showing that you've done your homework, I feel like, is one thing. And then I will give a specific example of a strategy is, I learned the name of a program officer for an organization, and I may have just added them to a free event list, and they showed up, and I made sure they sat next to the board chair. I mean, it's just, and there was no ask, and there was nothing, but the event they attended was a great example of the work that we do, and it was a scholarship lunch. And so it was just pure information, education, cultivation. It was that at its purest and finest, and then sent a thank you note. Not had any communication since then, but lo and behold, we became, we were on that organization's radar. Now, it's possible they may have accepted the invitation because they were already looking at us to get more involved, but I felt like I did what I could in that area because I had failed miserably to get in front of that organization for the better part of 5 years. Transparent.
Think that's where the strategy on cultivation and relationship building ties directly to grants, because we will tell our clients, we're like, okay, we're gonna prep all the work, we're gonna get you ready to write or to apply, but you have to do the cultivation piece. And so sometimes that cultivation piece might take 5 years to do, and it can be a simple blanket email, like, invitation to an event, and you're like, "I did not know that they would actually bite on that." And guess what they did? And now, even though you might have failed miserably for 5 years, but they've heard of y'all for 5 years, and you finally found something that met the way that they needed to be met. And then you've primed yourself for either an individual gift ask, a ask from the foundation, a grant application. And so when we talk about cultivation, that's where we're like, your board, your executive director, your development person, they need to be building those relationships, because it's getting your foot in the door. And it doesn't mean that when when you get your foot in the door for a grant, that's going to help determine whether or not you get funded. But man, it's nice to have someone in that reviewer room that says, "Oh, I know who those people are. It to their event," or, my mom serves on something that they do and we really like them. That's the piece of cultivation that we talk about for grants that may not immediately mean dollars in the bank or a grant award, but that's going to get you further than a cold application, which is honestly the same as a cold call ask for $50 to whatever.
Times.
I agree. I agree with that. The same thing goes when we're talking some of the differences between those relationships and one-on-one donor relationships is, again, the importance of retaining that donor. And even though their gifts may be small over 5, 10 years, we as fundraisers can't forget that there's also the opportunity for gifts that come um, in 20, 30 years, or even bequeathed gifts, that because this group gave to your organization for multiple years, and you stewarded them correctly, they saw, like you just said, Allison, the impact of your organization, even though, the funder may say, not now, not yet. Um, but if you keep telling them your story and you keep presenting, your data and your impact and your stories and all of those things over time, they may say, "You know what? This organization has come to us for 5 years."
Yeah.
And, I think now they've got my attention. So, I think that happens with people assuming it's a small gift and they're not a major donor. But we don't always know. We don't always know what that looks like and how we have benefited that donor and created, added to their generosity and how they feel about philanthropy, especially to our organizations.
So we were working with a client who is a school, and we found this foundation that was perfect for the project that they needed funding for. And so we gave them the list of the board members and said, run a report from all of your donors, ask your board, do they know anyone? Come to find out, one of the board members for the foundation had been giving a $25 gift for 15 years. And so they ended up reaching out to this board member and was like, "Hey, we've been slowly cultivating you with just, general data information, invites to all of the things." And they would get invited and they would come, but they wouldn't give more than their $25. And come to find out, they ended up, I don't, obviously in grants, you can't really say like, because we cultivated a $25 gift, we then got this grant for whatever it was. But they ended up getting a significant award because they had already had a relationship with a board member, unbeknownst to them that there was that linkage there. And so I think that's when fundraising and grants come together and can turn into something really beautiful. That if we're doing it in silos, then you miss that cultivation piece and you miss the part where um, a small gift can turn into an actual grant, which can turn into larger impact than what that $25 was.
Back to the human connection.
I know.
Back to the human connection. I do want to add, you were talking earlier about when you come into an organization and you talked about writing, and I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk about grant writing because that is a very specific skill that I enjoy and prefer for the experts to do. But one of the things that I do love about the parallels of the fundraising and the grant writing is, you know, any good fundraiser is going to write a case statement. They're going to write a narrative. They're going to make sure there's a budget. They're going to show intended outcomes. And it's all the same. We should be writing all of the same things that a grant is asking for. Just sometimes the language is different depending on the audience. But I do think maybe people like me are more of a talker than a writer. And so I can tell you all about it, but I should have it all written down. And I think grants also make us write it down. Right. And so I think we do have it. In big campaigns, you're going to have all kinds of things written down with your planning and prospecting. But I think that's one of the things that I've found most beneficial, especially after reviewing so many grants over the years. Now I can kind of see in my head what a proposal should look like, because I can almost hand a grant writer the proposal that I write for someone else, maybe individual major donor, and they've got almost everything they need to reword it into a grant format. And so I just think that's one of the things that I've taken from grant experience, is that really clear writing.
The other thing I was gonna add, and I'm glad you segued me in, but one of the things that I see, especially because, Nicole and I aren't going to have all the answers, especially for very specific grants, and an example that I have is we just wrote a big STEM grant for some equipment and things that we wanted for the school that I absolutely 150% cannot speak to, but it gave me an opportunity. And I think this is where people think, oh, I can't do that on one person. I'm never going to get this done. It's too much. This is really where you need to add your teams and you need to think of people that you haven't thought of. Um, so, we engaged with one of of course, our director of our STEM programs here at the school, who has amazing ideas. He came out of a big organization in another state, and he brought some great points and some great concepts and some great ideas to the grant and was able to really speak to it. um, and I think that that's important, that you remember that you don't have to be an expert to do any of this. Well, maybe a little bit, but just kidding. But anyway, uh, but you really do, even if you're a small organization, like you just said, Nicole, reach out to your board members or reach out to some of the people that you can have engage in this process, that can add some pointers that just are not part of your wheelhouse, right? And so we did receive money for that grant. And, I tell everyone I take zero credit for it, because basically I did what Nicole does, but not probably to the level that she did it with. Like, here's some points, here's
Mhm.
some of the things that I can pull, here's some of the talking points to the school and the impact that our school is having on our community. Um, but here's the beef, right? Here's the meat of it, and engage with people to help and assist you with that within your organization, or experts in that field, and it really is beneficial. And the same thing goes on that side of fundraising. It is about those relationships, and you never know who knows who, and who the best person is to talk to those people. And it might not be you, even though you are the advancement officer for the organization or the executive director. It may be someone who sits at another desk who's like, yeah, well, I know so and so, do you think they'd be of value? And you're like, what? So yeah, I mean, talk about these things when you get the opportunity, because you never know how people can help you with the specifics of those grants, where there's something that's very specific. And the same side of that goes with fundraising. What do you know about this organization, and how can we get into this corporation to talk to them about a major gift to our school?
Was talking to my dad a while back, and he was talking about how when he worked, he's retired now, but when he was working, they did weekly team meetings, and they had like 1 minute. Each person had to tell exactly like their hot topic for the minute. And I thought to myself, this is how you convey your most important pieces of information to everyone you might not see all the time, right? You might not be the one right next to their cubicle or anything, but those type of conversations of if you can integrate them as a process or a tool for your team, of what are my top hot topic minute discussions that I need someone else's help on. Like this is a foundation we're trying to get into. This is a donor. This is our plan that we have. How can you help? Because most people don't even know what's going on within their own organization outside of their parameters, right? We stay in our lane. We try not to get into other people's ways. But sometimes you really got to cross those barriers and say, we need help finding out who knows who, and let's build those relationships. And I'm thinking of different ways of how you could create support systems within a smaller organization or a larger organization for working more as a team and making strategies that align together. I think is going to help long term of building a cohesive plan for the organization as a whole of how are we going to fundraise for this, and how are we going to write grants for this, and how are we going to find the capital, and all the other things that go into the work that the three of us do. Because yeah, it's really pretty to have someone's name on a building and you walk in and you're like, "I wrote the grant. That's who I wrote the grant to." Or you're like, "Oh, I talked to that funder." And I love funder walls because I get to see the work that we did. Um, but I think if we don't build the strategy behind it all, then those funder walls never really show up, right? Because we didn't do the best work that we could do. So in that vein, um, before we wrap up, because we're almost at time and I don't want to go over y'all's time, what are some tips, tools, advice that you could give to someone and how to work together in building strategy for fundraising as a whole, since grants is a piece of fundraising and um, donor development and all of that stuff? So take it away, Nicole.
So how do we work together with grants? Because we have
Yeah.
a whole grants department. Thankfully, that there are really great folks who have the skills. We try to bring them in early. What's that?
Bragging.
No, I'm just not trying to take credit for writing any of these because I can write a mad proposal, but that is not grant language. And I am very clear about that. But but it's also a challenge because we have all these folks who are assigned to different campuses and they kind of have a different focus. And so when we start an initiative, we call them and say, hey, just like when we do donor research, we start doing that sort of research on the grant side and say, here's the project. Can you go see who might be interested in this? And so we kind of that's a parallel. So that's one of the ways that we do that. And again, we write all the details on what do we need and why and how and so what, and how much is it going to cost, and then then build it out for the appropriate audience. And so I think that's what we try to do. Um, are we always great about going to the grant writers at the beginning? No, but we've learned our lessons because grant writing takes time and there are very specific grant deadlines. And if you miss it, you're toast, potentially for a year.
Yep.
Maybe it's a different cycle, might be quarterly, but most of the time it's a year. And so we've learned our lesson in that case about making sure you put grants on the front end to give yourself plenty of time. We also have this approvals process thing that is a whole other story, which is part of the timeline. But I mean, that's one of the ways that we do our best is to bring in the grants team early on, or the grant developer,
Hmm.
really.
And I think, from a fundraising perspective, the plan is pretty much the same. I think we don't typically, especially if you have a defined organization that does, and a department that does that, we all have to play our roles, right? And I think that that's something that you have to remember and remind yourself is, even if you are the executive director of a wonderful organization and you're it and maybe a part-time volunteer person, you know don't close in your walls around you. From a fundraising perspective, build your team, and remember, it doesn't have to be all internal.
Right.
It can include external folks as well. Um, People that have input to your organization, or talk to mentors, talk to people. I always advise folks. And I get a call about once a month from someone going, "Hey, Troy, can you send me this? Can you send me that?" And I always tell everyone I start every conference like this when I'm speaking is that if you think you're doing something for the first time, then you're very short-sighted. I promise you there's someone out there who has already done it. And I think in our community, we're usually very willing to share that and to share those ideas and those concepts, those timelines, the how-to document. And so I would encourage you to get educated, to get as much professional development as you can, um, and then to use your community. If you're in the nonprofit world, you have a community,
Yep.
or you're not going to survive. And
No
that's
matter where you live,
raising,
there's a
that's
community.
preparing meals and all of it. I mean, whatever your nonprofit is, you've built community somewhere along the line, or you're not surviving. So use those folks in everything you do. Everything you do, you should be using all of your people, because then think about it. It's not only you speaking, because you're supposed to know your organization, but luckily for Nicole and I, we have parents, we have students who go out there and tell everyone how wonderful we are, hopefully. Um, and it's that one person, one person, one person, one person. And so the more people that are out there talking about the greatness that you've brought their child or their student, or how this person has excelled, or how food banks saved their lives, or different thing, it's just one more voice out there. So I just I can't say that enough. There has to be some leads, but let people, run with the stories and run with the help, and if someone offers to help you, let them help you. And spread that glory of your institution.
Think from my perspective, I would say a tool strategy would be create that playbook of we know that this year we need to raise dollars for these 5 buckets, and create that content up front and give it to whoever in that team needs it. And if data changes or the narrative changes, make sure you update it. But if you're going at fundraising as a whole together in one fell swoop, then you're gonna save yourself time in the long run of not having to piecemeal pieces of a narrative together or a ask together, because many nonprofits are it is a one-man show who's got to do everything. And when you're bringing in a volunteer, it's almost better to be like, here you go, here's all of the words that you were ever going to need about the content that we need your help on is all written down. And so you're not gonna have to reinvent the wheel every time. And so we talk about that through one of our courses that we offer is building a master template of your standardized language. And yes, you can filter that into the voice that you need, whether it's a grant, a pitch, an appeal, whatever that is. But then your marketing is the same, your narratives are the same, the what you're emailing to people has the same type of language, and they can tailor it to their needs and how they're going to communicate. But having a solid document that says this is where we're starting and this is our goal, and here everyone go forth and prosper, that's going to be better than every 2 weeks you have to go back to someone and say, oh, well, I need a different statement around this, because you haven't created that whole strategy together to begin with. Any other thoughts before we wrap it up?
So many thoughts, but no.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think that we're all open for conversations, and I know I am always happy to help and share, and I don't typically feel threatened by anyone asking me for my inside work. So yeah, back to you, Allison. I think that those documents that you're talking about, you can take someone else's and make it yours too. So don't think there's so many templates out there. Don't think that you have to reinvent the wheel, because it's already been invented. Sorry. And you just need to make it to your organization and better for you and your community. So that would be my wrap up.
Well, thank you both for spending time with me today. We are going to go ahead and wrap up. And in the show notes, there will be links on some resources to work together as a team and how to build those strategies as a whole. So if you go into the show notes, hit the link and it'll give you a resource. Like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next 2 weeks for the next episode. Thank y'all so much.
Thank you.
For years, organizations have told us the same things. We need help staying consistent with grant writing. We need templates that actually work. We wish someone could guide us step by step. We don't have dedicated staff, but we still want to win grants. So we listened, and we built something new. Something designed to transform how small teams, nonprofits, tribes, and municipalities approach grant writing. It's called the Grant Builder Collective, and this is not a course, it's not a webinar, and it's not a one-off training. Because let's be honest, grant writing's hard when you're doing it alone. Time is tight, funders feel unclear, language gets stuck, momentum fades. The Grant Builder Collective fixes that. Inside, you'll get guided co-working sessions, proven templates for every section of a proposal, expert support when questions come up, and a community that truly understands this work. This isn't just a membership. It's a structured system for building clarity, confidence, and steady momentum in your grant work. If you're ready for less scrambling and more strategy, the Grant Builder Collective was built for you. Join us today at www.boydgrantsacademy.com and start building momentum in your grant work. One habit, one session, one win at a time. We'll see you there.